Today, I want to talk about common mistakes that I see seed stage companies make with equity, generally speaking. Now, look, I don't do a lot of seed stage investing, to be honest, but I see the results of poor decisions with regard to equity that are made at the seed stage when I'm investing at the Series A. And occasionally, like, those mistakes are so bad that it basically kills the company because they can't raise more money at the Series A stage because they have so many problems. So today I thought I would talk through like some of what those problems are. And hopefully this is a helpful video. If you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking, hey, what are some mistakes that some pitfalls that I should avoid? Hopefully there's some helpful information here. And also if you're an investor or up and coming investor and trying to understand what are the red flags that you should be aware of, whether you're investing at the seed stage or the Series A or later. So the first thing I want to talk about is not issuing enough equity to the key team members in your company. Now, oftentimes, like entrepreneurs are, they're really equity hungry. And that makes sense, right? Like you're the one taking a huge risk here, and you want to own as much of this thing as possible. But the flip side is you need to be able to attract really, really great people to your team, and you need to be able to retain them. And so being too stingy on equity can cause problems in terms of like you just don't get the very best people out there. Now there are some people that say, that's fine. I don't need the very best people. I just need people that are good enough. I'm not going to give them any equity. I'm going to hoard it all for myself, and that's fine. I think if you're going to build that sort of business, you're ultimately not going to get the very, very best people out there. And so you have to kind of settle and build a business where you don't have the best people. And instead, it's going to be really hard for you to compete against other companies that do have the best people. And so that's just something to think about. If you're building more of a lifestyle business than a fast-paced, high-growth startup, then that actually probably makes more sense to go that route and not share very much equity. But if you're in the game to build something fast and you value your time more than you do, the ultimate amount of money you'll make in the long run, then bringing on the very best people and compensating them for the risks that they're also taking, right? Because they're giving up job security and income in many cases, making sure that they have a good chunk of equity so that they can have like a big outcome. If you have a big outcome and you have really good alignment, super important. I've seen many cases where the entrepreneur didn't give enough equity to the people that were the absolute rock stars, and those people ended up leaving after a year or two and going and starting sometimes competing companies. Sometimes they just left, and the company was like in a bit of a rut because they didn't have the support they needed to keep building the company, and they had to go find somebody and train them, and they lost a ton of time and energy through that whole process. So super important that you get the right people on the bus and that they're well aligned with you. Now, the next problem though is sometimes entrepreneurs give too much equity to the wrong people. And so understanding how much equity you should give to each person is super important. Now that varies quite a bit based on the stage of the company and so forth. But generally, in my opinion, like founders should be receiving double-digit percentages of the company. And then early employees should be like single digits. And then after that, like once you've kind of established that base and you're hiring more and more people after you've kind of built the product and you start getting revenue and customers, then you're talking about like less than 1% ownership given out to employees at that point. It also matters in terms of like how much value they're going to bring to the organization and how much credibility and so forth. And so there can be value in terms of scaling up the amount of equity somebody's going to receive. But in general, what I've seen when people give too much equity is they're really excited to bring this person on, but they don't fully appreciate the value or the relative to the amount of equity they give them. And then that person doesn't end up working out. And now you've got a bunch of dead weight on your cap table. And venture capitalists don't particularly like that because like equity is just like so valuable within a company because it can be used to incentivize and bring on new people. And so if you've got like a big chunk of equity just like sitting there in the company and that person is not doing anything for you, then that's like dead weight. That's equity you can't give to somebody else. And in fact, in my opinion, if that happens to you, what you should do is figure out a way to buy them out, get them off the cap table, right? Let them retain, maybe you let them retain a small piece, like a few percentage points, but get them, if they own like 10, 20, 30% of the company, you got to like figure out how to basically restructure and get them out of the company. Maybe that even requires doing a full restart. But that sort of thing can definitely kill a company. So what do you do to really solve for that problem? Because if you do have like this awesome co-founder and you want to give them a big chunk of the company, right? Well, what you do is like failure number 3 that I oftentimes see, and that's not putting in place a good vesting schedule. So you should have a good vesting schedule from like day 1 in the company. Now, what do I mean by a vesting schedule? Well, a vesting schedule is simply this concept where instead of me giving you all the shares day 1, I say, okay, you know what? You're going to get 20% of the company over time, over the next 4 years. And every year there's going to be like an annual cliff where you'll get another, 25% of the total amount that we're going to give you. So if we're going to give you 20%, then every year you get 5% of the company. As long as you stay with the company, you're doing a good job. If you're not doing a good job, then we fire you, you're out, you don't get your equity. And also if you leave early, you don't get your equity. And that way you really align people to like be on board, working hard for the equity, which is ultimately what you really want. Is you want everybody kind of like swinging for the fences, heading in the same direction. Now, a lot of different structures in terms of how to set up vesting schedules. And maybe in the future, I'll do a video on the different formats that I've seen and the ones that I like and don't. I mean, you've got everyone from like Snapchat or Snap today who had a vesting schedule. It was like you don't get any equity until year 5. You gotta like just crank it out for 5 years and then boom, you get all of your equity. That's got pros and cons, right? The pro is like you get people that are like dedicated, they're gonna stick with you for 5 years if they're real believers, or they're out like super early. And so you get this like you're either in or you're out fast, right? But the downside is what do you think happens after 5 years? They get their equity and then they're out, right? And then you lost somebody that had like 5 years of institutional knowledge all locked up there. I would say that that's a bit of an outlier. Most companies will do like annual cliffs where once, every year you get a chunk of your equity. You can also sometimes tie like equity to different milestones or projects or accomplishments within the company. And so that can be like another way. But at the end of the day, what you want is you want to make sure that you're not just like giving stuff away for nothing, right? Equity should be used as a form of compensation and as a way to create really good alignment. All right, the next one that I want to talk about is overvaluing the company. Now, what does like value of the company have to do with equity? Well, you got to put a price on the equity. And so oftentimes you'll do what's called a 409A valuation where you hire a firm like Carta, which we're an investor in, or another group like Scalar Analytics, which, I'm really good friends with the team over there. And those firms come in, they analyze your business, and they give you a price or a value of what your business is worth. And then you peg the ownership that you're giving out to employees based on that valuation. Now, when it's really early in a company, you may not know exactly what that valuation is. And generally, there's like this incentive to push the valuation as high as you possibly can, because then you're saying, okay, well, if my company is worth, $10 million and I give somebody 10% of the company, like I'm giving them like $1 million worth of value, right? And so like, wow, that's a lot of money. Like they should be like super grateful or whatever. Or maybe I'm just going to give them, instead of $1 million or 10%, I'm going to give them 1%, and that's $100,000 worth of value, right? And so I'm like, hey, yeah, you took a $100,000 pay cut, but I'm giving you $100,000, right? There are a lot of reasons why, as an owner, you want to increase that valuation as high as you can. Now, one of the problems, though, is that if you push the valuation up too high, it can make it really difficult to fundraise in the future, because now all these people have pegged the value of their stock at this higher number. And, they may say, oh, this is awesome. Like I got $100,000 worth of stock. But it's a little bit arbitrary because it's a number that like you might have just kind of come up with, right? And even if you use one of these valuation firms, right, oftentimes like there's not a lot for them to go on at the very, very seed stages of a company. And so, may not be appropriate for you to work with them yet or so forth. And so it can cause problems because later on, when you go and meet with a venture capitalist, they may look at this and say, you're not really worth 10 million. You're worth 5 million. And I'll invest at a $5 million valuation. And then that puts you in an awkward situation with your employees where you have to go back to them and say, oh yeah, you know how I said that I was giving you $100,000 worth of stock? Well, now it's actually only worth 50,000, right? And that can have huge consequences, right? People may look at that and be like, well, at 100,000, I was excited and happy. At 50,000, I'm less excited, and I don't have as much confidence in this company anymore because you just told me the valuation is half what you originally told me. I don't have as much confidence in you as the entrepreneur. It can cause a whole bag of worms. And then if you push back on the VC may just walk, right? They may say, look, you're worth 5, you're not worth 10. And so not a fit for us, right? We're not willing to take that risk at that valuation. And so that can cause a lot of problems as well. Even the fact that you just have that there, VCs are going to be thinking well, I don't want to come in and be the bad guy, the jerk that says, no, the company's not worth 10, it's worth 5. And now all the employees are grumpy because their valuation just got cut in half. They might leave. That causes all kinds of problems. And as a VC, they may just say, you know what? I'm not interested. I'm going to move on because there are other fish in the sea that I could fund instead that don't have these same problems. So be really thoughtful about, what value you put on the business and how you think about allocating equity accordingly. The worst is when people don't even think about valuation. They're just handing out equity willy-nilly, not realizing that when they do that, it actually has an implied valuation on the company. All right, the last one I want to talk about, and this is probably the number one most important advice that I could give you in regards to all of this stuff and is tied into all of these points, and that is get professional help from a very good attorney. Now, what do I mean by that? It's not just talk to your uncle or your cousin Bob who, went to law school, passed the bar, whatever, and practice it, creates wills for people. That, even though he's an attorney, that is not who you want. He will give you bad advice. I guarantee it, because I've seen it again and again and again. Sometimes I'll see, it's a family friend or what have you. I'm sure they are wonderful people, and I'm sure they are brilliant at what they do, but what you need is somebody that does this all the time. I've seen deals where they've gone to a top tier, what would be considered a really good law firm, but a law firm that doesn't do this type of work. And that law firm creates these weird contracts and setups that make no sense at all for venture capital. And then you get them as a VC and you're like, what the heck is this mess? We're going to have to hire an attorney, pay him tons of money to restructure this whole thing. It's going to cost a ton of money. It's going to make a ton of people grumpy. It's going to change a bunch of things. So if you're going to raise venture money, or you think you're going to raise venture money in the future, go find an attorney that does this type of work all the time, that works with startups all the time. They will be incredibly helpful in terms of helping you structure things the right way, set up your vesting programs and schedules, make sure that you have the entities set up the right way. If you're going to do an LLC instead of a C Corp, they'll help you set it up in such a way that it's easy to transfer it over into a C Corp, because eventually you're going to want to be a C Corp if you raise money. They'll be able to tell you and give you guidance in terms of what are market valuations for companies at your stage and help you get guidance there. They'll be able to connect you to other service providers that are really important, as well as many times help connect you to VCs. It can be incredibly valuable to have the right type of attorney on your team. And oftentimes people don't do it because it's really expensive, or they think it's going to be really expensive. But if you've got a really great company and a good team behind you, many law firms will oftentimes waive or partially waive or significantly discount their legal services at the very early stages, because they want to be with you as you grow, and they're going to make their money on transactions that occur later on over time as you have more funds and resources to pay them. And so they're willing to take a bit of a hit in the beginning. So, if you talk to firms like Gunderson and Wilson Sonsini and Cooley, which are kind of big national firms, as well as smaller regional firms, they all have programs like this where they work with startups because this is their bread and butter. And the way they think about it is similar to like a VC in that, hey, look, we're gonna do a bunch of work for a bunch of startups, and we're probably gonna kind of lose money on most of them. But when we land, the next Facebook, we're gonna make so much money off Facebook that like it will cover all of the losses and then some. And the reality is they don't even need, like, unlike venture funds where we need to invest and see the company eventually get to like a big outcome for us to generate a return, they just need to see the company get to a Series A, Series B, etc., and then they'll recoup a lot of the money that they've spent. So anyways, point is, get good professional help. My tip there is ask the lawyer how many transactions they've closed that were venture financed and who financed those transactions or which companies they worked with, and or talk to entrepreneurs that have raised money that you know and respect and ask them who their attorney is and ask for an intro. Probably some of the best ways to make sure that you get somebody that actually knows what they're doing. Anyways, hopefully this video was helpful. Be sure to check out some of my other videos, like how do private equity firms find companies to buy. Drop me some comments down below. What did you think of this video? Should I do more like this? What questions do you have about equity? Thanks.